I came across a fascinating study that links wildfire smoke to increases in violent assaults, focusing on Seattle over an 11-year period. And I found it really intriguing because we often think about wildfire smoke in terms of respiratory health, but this study by Leon Critchus takes it a step further. They explain how these tiny particles in smoke might actually influence human behavior, especially violence. Welcome to the Hazardscape podcast, where we discuss Indigenous emergency management as our small contribution to enhancing Indigenous community public safety in our efforts to reconcile the relationship between the Crown and all nations. So the study zeroes in on parts per million, 2.5. So I'll just go PM 2.5, which is, it's fine particulate matters less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter. And that's going to come from wildfire smoke specifically, because we know these particles are harmful physically. We know that if it gets into our lungs or it sits in our attics or our windowsills, there's risk for contamination. But this is the first time that I saw anything with a direct sort of casual estimate connecting wildfire smoke or exposure to sort of an increase in assaults. And why this was done in Seattle was because they generally have pretty clean air being on the coast with the winds. So the episodic nature of wildfire smoke there provides, I think, what they say is a natural experiment to isolate the effects. And before I get really into this, I think that it's important to maybe unpack why the PM 2.5 is so important, not just for health, but for behavior. It's because these particulates are tiny enough to penetrate deep into the lungs, enter into the bloodstream, and they could even get into the brain. And that's where this gets really concerning for me, because especially in Canada, we're sending people in with PPE, personal protective equipment, if they're fighting the fire. But what about evacuees? What about people that are exposed to this working outside without any sort of respirator or equipment? And, we're seeing an uptick as well in Canada about research around wildfire smoke and just, structural fire smoke and how it can impact a person in terms of getting cancer or lung cancer or heart disease. So the short-term exposure to a PM 2.5 is linked to mental health issues, things like depression and even suicidal thoughts. But the biological mechanisms for this are quite compelling to me, because they're starting to see neuroinflammation and disruption of the neurotransmitter systems, including serotonin, which plays a big role in mood regulation and impulse control. And what's interesting about this is, it kind of just came to me as I was reading this, but there's a woman, I just went and found it because I want to mention this, Caroline Fraser, who did a book in 2025 called Murderland: Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers, which she hypothesizes that lead and other toxic materials are linked to violent and aggressive behavior, because she kind of found a correlation between serial killers like Ted Bundy or Gary Ridgway that lived near sort of these smelter areas or places of toxicity. So seeing this wildfire smoke research just kind of drew me to that. Plus, there's exposure ramps up stress hormones like cortisol, which are known to correlate with aggressive behavior. So it's not just physical discomfort for smoke inhalation, like sore throats or respiratory irritation. That might increase stress and lower frustration tolerance, but also deeper neurochemical changes. And behaviorally, people might stay indoors to avoid smoke, which could increase, domestic tensions. Like we did see that with COVID. And we even see that with evacuees that are in these sort of group lodgings for a long period of time. That can lead to more domestic tensions. But at the same time, less outdoor socializing might reduce some types of violence. So there's a net effect that isn't obvious without kind of the data that's needed. So in the research, the theory suggests that short-term spikes in wildfire smoke derived from, PM 2.5 could elevate impulse, aggressive acts, especially assaults. However, it's not that easy. There is a lot of complexity to this. But if we're looking at turning to the study's design, the lead researcher uses data for 10 years from 2013 to 2023, which is, at the kind of 2023 was a bad wildfire year. So there was definitely there was a spike in data for that. But he combined daily assault reports from the police, air quality monitoring, and satellite-based wildfire smoke presence data. And I think the key challenge in isolating this is because pollution levels can fluctuate not only because of wildfire smoke, but vehicles. There's a lot of shipping around Seattle. The study uses what's called an instrumental variable approach, where wildfire smoke presence detected by satellites serves as the instrument for the PM 2.5 levels. And this leverages sort of this quasi-random arrival of smoke to identify casual effects on assaults, which it's an interesting way to get around other confounding factors. And the statistical model is 2 stages: residual inclusion and Poisson regression, which is, appropriate here because since the outcome is daily assault counts, it feeds into count data. And they also try to control for weather variables like temperature, wind, precipitation, even public holidays, and include fixed effects for, station, year, month, and day of the week. Plus, they spatially restrict the analysis to specific police areas or police beats within 13 kilometers of the Environmental Protection Agency monitors to ensure accurate exposure assignment. And that spatial aspect is important because air pollution can vary quite a bit over short distances. So trying to match assaults to the nearest monitor helps improve their precision. At least that's what the theory is. Now, if we look at the findings, wildfire smoke affected about 11% of days in Seattle during the study period, mostly in summer, which makes sense, but with lengthening fire seasons. So on those smoke days, PM 2.5 levels increased by an average of 7 micrograms per cubic meter compared to non-smoke days. That increase corresponds to a 3.6% rise in daily assaults, which, that's significant. To put that into perspective, Seattle averages about 21 assaults per day. So that's roughly 3/4 of an additional assault on smoke days. And it's significant considering it's like an immediate effect, right, of the smoke arrival, with no evidence of pre trends or spillover before or after. And the relationship between PM 2.5 and assaults appears roughly linear over the observed range, and robustness checks with different spatial buffers and functional forms confirmed the stability of the results. That's kind of verbatim from the reporting. But what I find particularly interesting is, how the study looked at, mechanisms using proxy data like domestic violence calls to police that don't increase on smoke days, suggesting the effect isn't driven necessarily by indoor or domestic violence. And even traffic collision reports also don't increase, which argues against explanations based on reduced attention or reporting bias. But even police use of force data shows an increase in lower severity incidents, like pointing guns or first aid level injuries on smoke days, consistent with increased aggression or irritability. But more severe police use of force incidents don't increase, indicating the effect is specific to impulsive, less severe violence. And it's important to note, too, that police response times to domestic violence calls don't change on smoke days, ruling out any kind of reduced law enforcement capacity as a confounder. So I think when you look at all of these things together, these patterns support the hypothesis that wildfire smoke exposure increases outdoor impulsive assaults through some form of biological and psychosocial stress pathways within the human body. And, it's kind of like with the book about Murderland and with this, it's a compelling argument. And it adds, I think, a new dimension to the health impacts and stressors around climate change and, related social outcomes like violence. And I also think that in some regions, wildfire smoke might account for over 2.5 micromillimeters, 2.5 exposure by mid-century, which could be substantial if we're looking at social costs beyond just sort of these physical health issues that we would normally associate with wildfire. And those costs are not going to be shared evenly across communities, right? Outdoor workers, like I said, those without access to filtered indoor air, remote indigenous communities, it raises serious environmental justice concerns because these groups bear a disproportionate burden of both health and social risks, because when you combine smoke exposure and evacuation and all of the social issues that come with evacuation, this really becomes a deeper layer of onions, right? Or that idea of having an onion has layers to evacuation, layers to climate change, all of the effects. But, the study did rely on police reported assaults, which again could undercount actual violence, right? So there's a bit of a reporting bias there. And then the PM 2.5 measurements reflect ambient outdoor pollution and can't capture individual level or indoor exposure. So there's some data that can't be captured there, right? And the study is limited to one high-income city with relatively clean baseline air. So results may differ in other settings with different pollution regimes or pollution levels, like if you were to look at this in Los Angeles, or if you were to come up to Edmonton in the north, or Toronto, right? What would the results be there? So the effect is immediate. It's robust and consistent with biological stress and irritation, but it adds a new dimension to all of this, and it highlights that, as wildfire seasons grow longer and more intense, these types of findings become even more relevant globally, because we're seeing through, great online tools like Fire Smoke, just where the smoke travels to and how far reaching it goes. So to kind of sum up on my quick summary here, I think wildfires smoke is more than just a health hazard. It is a social hazard. It could even be considered a cultural and economic hazard, because especially in urban settings, remote settings where there's higher exposure, less ability to get to clean air, and maybe areas that don't have good education around personal protective equipment or access to it, this really highlights the need to have to study the effects of this on all areas of community, civilization, society, not only in Canada, but across the entire world. So, yeah, again, the research report is wildfire smoke increases assaults, evidence from Seattle. It's done by Leon Kirchis, 2026. I think you can Google it. I'm going to put it on the Patreon page. I'll link the article in our Patreon post. But very interesting stuff here as we explore this. So yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us at Hazardscape. You can subscribe to our YouTube and find our ad-free training videos by becoming a supporter on Patreon with a network of other Indigenous peoples looking to make their communities safer. And remember, know your hazardscape and be prepared.